Hello to my fellow navigators of 90s nostalgia. This is DS Lyons of the Movie Blues. Today, on the 6th episode of the Movie Blues Show, a long-form media examination series, I'll be breaking down my all-time favorite movies that were adapted from famous TV shows during the blessed decade of the 1990s. We're going to explore about a dozen of these nostalgic masterpieces across every year of the 1990s. Sometimes with multiple films in the same year.
Two chicks at the same time, man.
We're going to deep dive into each of these films' crazy histories and productions, as well as my deep connection to many of these classics that basically defined my childhood growing up in the 90s. I'm also going to check out one of the most famous of these TV movie adaptations, which I've never even seen, about Han Solo chasing a disabled Italian cop while also being chased by Two-Face. Finally, and what I'm most excited for in this video, I'm going to sit down with Lloyd Schwartz, producer, director, and co-creator of the many iterations of the Brady Bunch, in a rare interview about the legacy of the series and the iconic Brady movie adaptation from 1995 that nearly drove all the show's creators to complete insanity. So join me today as we explore some of my favorite movies from my favorite decade, as the Movie Blues Show investigates the best TV to film adaptations of the 90s. From Mulder and Scully to the Caped Crusader, the 90s were the golden era of watching our favorite heroes, detectives, and IMF employees taking the leap from the tiny tube to the silver screen. And it was no coincidence that all of this was happening during the 90s either, because the TV to movie adaptations of that decade were the gorgeous offspring of the best parts and trends of the 90s media landscape, a period of time so rich with creativity and burgeoning artistic genius that we were positively spoiled with a bevy of clever and honestly iconic adaptations of TV's biggest shows. As the 90s gave us huge advances in CGI, production value, and cinematic glory, the best stories and IPs from our parents' generation were given a revamp by this new, rude, jiggy, and edgy decade, bringing the 2D and Technicolor stories of the past into the gnarly 90s. So without further ado, let's get this journey started. I want to start this video out by establishing my connection to these amazing films. Sure, but I also feel like it's necessary to illustrate what kind of world we lived in back in the 90s. A lot of you watching this video probably grew up in a world where even a DVD in the mail was something that had been phased out before you even gained sentience. And to me, a dude born in 1987, that shit was futuristic as hell. So the idea of no streaming, no movie pass, no widescreen televisions, no water cooler Netflix binge conversations, I mean, to some of you, that may seem like the dark ages. So, for those who need it, I will be painting a picture of this dark and disconnected world of limited media, with a quick anecdote about my first in-theater TV to movie adaptation of the 90s. The first time I watched a beloved TV show become suddenly larger than life. Let me paint a picture for you, my dear viewer, of this bizarre and beautiful time. And to those who lived through the 90s, how's your back feeling, baby? And yeah, for those who lived through the 90s, this will be a fun way, hopefully, to transport yourself back to that time and appreciate it all over again. Now I'd like you to travel back with me, dear viewer, to the Stone Ages of 1994, off the coast of Florida, deep in the Atlantic Ocean. Our story begins on the Regal Princess, a cruise ship caught in the pangs of an evolving tempest. Here's me, little DS, 7 years old. Yes, the same DS that saw Jurassic Park 1 year prior in 1993, smiling from ear to ear as his dream of dinosaurs finally unextincted itself onto cinema screens, while his older brother cried in abject horror and eventually had to be taken out of the movie by my bubby, who waited with him in the lobby because he was so scared of the raptors. Anyway, young DS was an adventurous tyke, a TV and movie-obsessed nerd in training who spent his days drawing and dreaming of Star Wars. This was a boy who gathered with his family, same time, same channel, every Friday night to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation and The X-Files.
The X-Files, a new dramatic series premiering Friday, September 10th.
Yes, faithful viewer, this was during the time when you had to plan your TV watching, because if you missed an important episode, you were in big bantha poodoo.
Do you ever get the feeling you're missing something when you're watching TV? If so, read TV Guide.
So as a family, you'd have real rituals, you'd have an exact time, an exact place, and you could easily define your family's overall style by what you gathered in front of the boob tube for. There were Star Trek families like mine, there were MASH families, there were Nick at Night nostalgia families as well.
The every night good TV brand for your viewing delight. It's Nick at Night.
And then, of course, you had your sports broods and your game show gangs. In the 90s, you had to not only agree on being somewhere when something aired, but in a nuclear family, you had to plan as a unit as well.
Synchronize your watches.
I don't know how to do that.
I don't wear a watch. Time is a construct.
I mean, there's a little book with like friggin' Urkel on it. You'd have to literally look up your shows and write down when they were on and what new events were coming your way. There was no iPad that little Timmy could play Candy Crush on because he has the attention span of a fucking plankton. There were no picture-in-picture options of the early 2000s. Hell, you'd even be lucky in my day if you had two fully functional cable TVs in the same house. So we gathered, we ritualized, we obsessed over TV in a way that this generation simply will not understand. Because the options that were available to us were more akin to an oasis in the desert than today's flooded media landscape, which is overblown with so many trillions of options that you could start a new TV show every night of your life for the rest of your life, and you'd probably still have a new pilot every night until the moment you expired from old age. And it was back in this minimal, restricted, and simplistic era that your boy DS was riding the high seas of the Atlantic via the Princess Cruise Line. And it was on that cruise where I would get my first taste of many different freedoms, including the touch of a woman. Jesus Christ, I'm kidding. I was 7. I got my first taste of a really cool 7-year-old set of freedoms, though, like unlimited soda, things like that. So let me break it down for you. On the ship, they had this cool kids club where you could have access to a private arcade, a pool, a dance club, and a movie theater. And yeah, that sounds like what most kids have access to today inside of their cell phone, but to a young DS, this level of media freedom just seemed bigger than real life. I mean, one day they projected Super Mario Bros. 3 on the friggin' movie theater screen. I got to sit and play a game on a movie theater screen. That was crazy. Movies were things that your parents had to take you to, things that cost money and that you had very little say in. And then bam, there was this movie theater that was just constantly playing new movies all day, every day on the cruise. No tickets or parental guardian even needed. I mean, I could wander in and out of this bitch like a squatter watching movies in 10-minute increments, and I did. And the arcade, oh man, the arcade, it had everything. I got to play Primal Rage for the first time in this arcade, and guess what? It didn't even run on tokens. I had endless continues in Area 51. Now I could actually get to the end of this friggin' game and see what happens, without causing my dad to have to remortgage our house. At 7 years old in 1994, I had about as much access to endless video games as I have access to endless money as an adult. I don't, and it sucks. So, being a kid in the 90s and having a whole damn arcade with the gov taken off, that was huge. Finally, there was this nightclub, something I had not even a single ounce of experience in. I hadn't even been to a bar mitzvah yet. So I basically spent the entire time in that mini club like doing the worm on the ground and running all my sugar energy out of my body doing friggin' cartwheels under the lasers until I was basically comatose. Anyway, it was in this environment of free media, all-night sodas, laser beams, and endless movies that I experienced my first TV-to-movie adaptation of the 1990s in a theater. Call it perfect timing, call it a perfect representation of what is so special not only about these adaptations, but the era they existed in. But that night, on the high seas, I wandered into the cruise ship movie theater completely unaware of what I was seeing, and even more unaware of how much it was about to blow my frail pre-bar mitzvah mind. I'm Jewish. That is how we measure our mind blows. As the lights dimmed and the movie began, I was instantly transported to a black sea of stars. Familiar tones began to play, distant but recognizable. The credits began to roll, and immediately I recognized the familiar font of the names flashing across the screen. My God, my stars! At once I realized I was seeing Star Trek in a movie theater. Not only that, but this was Star Trek Generations, the brand new movie adaptation of the show that my family had religiously gathered around to watch every faithful Friday night. You see, while I was a Trekkie born and bred, tattoo photo for proof's sake, I had never seen a Star Trek movie in cinemas. Born a bit too late to see the original series movie in theaters and raised during the height of Next Generation mania, little DS hadn't gotten the chance to see a Star Trek film, or hell, a Star Wars film, or hell, any real kind of movie in space with lasers in a theater before. There really weren't a lot of kid-friendly sci-fi movies in cinemas during my first few formative years. And all at once, I found myself transported to a new world of cinema, an extension of my favorite TV show, and a mind-blowing spectacle all wrapped into one. Even this opening effect of a rotating CGI bottle hurtling towards the christening of the USS Enterprise B was basically unlike anything I'd ever seen in the show. This was cinematic, widescreen, with gorgeously rendered effects, at the time. And it was deeply and instantly moving. CGI was something you'd basically only see for laser blasts and cheap explosions on Star Trek, if at all. And right off the bat, this movie brought a stirring opening image to the table with this slow-moving grace that surely never could have worked in a TV format. All Star Trek episodes just kind of started on a boardroom or on the bridge, and then you were off to the races. But this movie, it just immediately felt like such a movie, in that it starts its journey by really taking its time with things. This first cold open not only slowly establishes the world that Trek takes place in, which is this nautical, tactical, military-adjacent utopia, but then it hits you immediately with a gut punch. So many of the best of these TV to film adaptations take immediate risks with characters in ways that the show really could never. And the opening of Generations, concluding with the death of James T. Kirk, is exactly the kind of kick in the pants that the Next Gen series needed to leap into cinemas. Watching Captain Kirk die in front of my face before a single Next Gen crew member shows up was this absolute wallop to my brain, and a sequence that simply never would have landed on TV. Then we're whisked off to, ironically, the high seas on a ship, where the crew of the Enterprise is playing dress-up and low-key lynching Worf for being a nerd. I mean, at best, on Next Generation, you'd see a stale set with fake water for a scene like this. But here we are, shooting the Enterprise crew in this regal and incredible way that seemed to just burst the restrictions of the TV format right in front of my eyes with bravado. The rest of the film is just full of spectacle moments that simply dwarfed the visual imagination of the show. From the crazy CGI brutality of the Nexus ribbon, to this incredible stellar cartography room that we had somehow never seen before on the Enterprise. I mean, this room is pure 90s cinema, baby. Seeing this room in the theater for the first time was like being on the Enterprise myself. Plus, the cruise ship I was on was really helping with the whole nautical Star Trek vibe, and the slow rock of the ship was like the 4DX machine for my young and impressionable brain. The end of this movie, when the Enterprise detaches like a UFO and crashes, I mean, this is crazy. And the addition of Malcolm McDowell just brings such a cinematic presence to this movie. He's such a menacing interloper throughout the film, and I love his vibe and his cool little sideways gap. And finally, a classic hallmark of these TV to movie adaptations is testing the mortality of your beloved TV characters like you never could on the show. And in this instance, wow. Not only does the cold open of this movie straight up murder Captain James T. Kirk, but even our man Picard ended up nearly dead in this one, as he was literally vaporized and sent to a fantasy world in a flying space ribbon, which basically mirrored the afterlife, all while his crew perished and crashed and burned on another planet in absolute misery. And okay, this wasn't the best reviewed, most respected, or even the most exciting Star Trek film.
I wonder if you'd even be able to understand one of these movies if you'd never seen a previous Star Trek film or TV show. Only belatedly do we get into the actual story, which involves a mad scientist who is desperate to return to a strange space energy coil.
Well, Roger, the things that you knock about the picture, I can't really praise that much. I mean,
it's just like a family reunion. And if you really look at it, you know, kind of with a cold eye in terms of just exactly how good of a science fiction movie this is, it's a pretty silly one.
I'm not a science fiction fan to begin with, and I enjoy it on the basis of family.
Family, 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 family. Family.
But Star Trek Generations still managed to level my brain entirely as a forming film buff. It blew the doors off the usually restrained visual palette of the Next Generation TV series. and offered up a story that bridged the original series to the new crew in a way that actually made it possible to enjoy the film if you had somehow missed Next Generation entirely. It, like many of the films we're about to discuss in this video, is a great example of the escalation, increased stakes, and improved visual elements of the show that it was adapted from in a way that would please fans of the show while dealing out enough spectacle to draw in new viewers. I left that cruise ship movie theater that night feeling like the rules of TV had been broken in front of my very eyes. Like the parentless follies of the teens club that gave me my first taste of freedom, the TV to movie adaptations of the 90s would continue to blow my mind and expand the limits of what I thought was possible when it came to our favorite fictional characters who'd been trapped inside my TV for years. My love for TV adaptations didn't begin here, but it surely was a moment in time I will never forget. And now, let's look at all the other masterpieces to sweep away my imagination during the decade where everything began to change, for me and for the movies. I mean, for me, yeah, I went through puberty, but also the movies didn't go through puberty. They just got different. They had different special effects. You'll see. Stay here. Keep watching this. Aha! Showtime! My childhood connection to our first film, 1991's The Addams Family, didn't actually blossom until 1993, when McDonald's came out with a seasonal promotion that offered The Addams Family on VHS for only $5.99, with the purchase of a large sandwich. This was a huge deal at the time, mostly because VHS tapes were pretty expensive back then, and because McDonald's food hadn't yet been outed as moldy poison, so people were really eating this deal up, and the food. My family chose the Addams Family tape over Charlotte's Web, Ghost with Patrick Swayze, or Wayne's World, because we were a pretty big Tim Burton family. Not that Burton directed the Addams Family movie, but from the box art and the promotions, it sure seemed like he did. This movie fit in well with the Nightmare Before Christmas tape that we were playing into absolute oblivion at the time, and within a few weeks of owning it, the Lyons family had watched the Addams Family like 20 times. This movie had everything for me. It was hilarious, sweet, demented, and full of iconic and unforgettable characters. Bravo! Portrayed by some of the greatest actors and actresses of all time. Angelica Houston was like my first goth mommy, and her whole vibe made me feel weird tinglies that I still haven't quite gotten over yet.
Don't torture yourself, Gomez. That's my job.
Even though her look in this movie was apparently achieved by taping her eyes and the sides of her face back so much and so painfully that she was like literally in like a Hellraiser trap basically all day, and it just sounds horrible. But Houston and Raul Julia's on-screen chemistry in this film, it's just simply delectable. With the two morbid figureheads of the Addams clan acting like the prototype of Joker and Harley Quinn of the early 1990s.
Last night you were unhinged. You frightened me. Do it again.
There was satire, dark humor, and some pretty sadistic plot points throughout this film. To this day, the Addams Family movie is an absolutely stellar family film that has stood the test of time and is still as deliciously dour as ever. Plus, I mean, who can deny the power of Christina Ricci's Wednesday? A child performance so rare and brilliant that she and Wednesday became simply iconic for decades to come.
I'll buy a cup if you buy a box of my delicious Girl Scout cookies. Are they made from real Girl Scouts?
I think without the popularity of Ricci's performance here, we'd never get Burton's actual eventual foray into the Addams world, Wednesday, which I will not watch. No thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the creator of the Addams Family, Charles Addams. This dude's history is not only intrinsic to Hollywood history, but holy shit did he live a pretty weird life. Charles Samuel Addams, who was born in January of 1912, was one of the most successful cartoonists of all time, drawing more than 1,300 cartoons over the course of his life and often contributing to famed magazine The New Yorker. And you may be wondering how the creator of the Addams Family conducted his personal life. And after reading into it a bit, it's pretty evident how this was the mind that created one of the most sexy, sadistic, and hedonistic on-screen relationships in media history. Okay, so Addams married his first wife in late 1943. And it was reported that Barbara Jean Day resembled Morticia Addams. After 8 years of marriage, Addams refused Day's request to have children, causing their relationship to crumble. She later went on to marry Addams' co-worker and friend at The New Yorker, which I'm sure didn't bother him at all. From there, Addams married his second wife, also bizarrely named Barbara, who was a lawyer that reportedly combined Morticia-like looks with diabolical legal scheming. After a series of less than reputable legal maneuvers, Barbara, too, secured control over the Addams Family TV and film franchises, eventually convincing her husband to give away other legal rights as well. At one point, it was reported that Barbara, too, even got Addams to take out a $100,000 life insurance policy, practically unheard of at the time. This led Addams to theorize that she would soon dispose of him and collect the money, which did not sit too well with the cartoonist, so he immediately sought a divorce. And I think that all this tomfoolery with women really kicked Addams full gear into his goth daddy era. Because when it came to marrying his next wife, Marilyn Matthews Miller, the couple would choose to trade their nuptials in a pet cemetery. Soon after, they moved to Sagaponack, New York, where they named their spooky love nest The Swamp. Eventually, Addams would pass away in his mid-70s, requesting that his ashes be spread in the pet cemetery connected to the swamp. Damn, Daddy Addams was a fucking edgelord. His legacy, cartoons, and characters would persist throughout time, gaining a loyal following of Addams Family sitcom fans who would be ready to put their hard-earned money down on the table as soon as they heard those iconic finger snaps. As the 90s approached, movie studios began reaching for all existing IP, much as they still do today, trying to capitalize on older fans of properties that they loved in the 60s when they were kids. It was during this period of time that super producer Scott Rudin, who would later go on to produce everything from No Country to Old Men to Uncut Gems to Clueless to 8 of Wes Anderson's films and so much more, was riding in a van with other company executives after a movie screening. Marketing chief Tom Sherrack and his young son were in the van as well, and when Tom's kid randomly began singing the Addams Family theme from '64, the whole van began singing along like it was Tiny Dancer and Almost Famous or something. Rudin remarked that everyone in the van knew every note and every beat of the song, something that would persist long after the remake was eventually greenlit. I mean, kids my age used to sing the Addams Family theme all the time.
Their house is a museum when people come to see them.
This experience in the van was the moment that Rudin knew that the Addams Family was still as relevant as ever. And the very next day, he proposed to the studio that they make an Addams Family reboot film, an idea that was immediately greenlit. So production began on the Addams Family film, with director Tim Burton initially attached. But when the schedule for Batman Returns demanded Burton's full attention, the director promptly left the project to go low-key destroy his own Batman series.
I'm having a great time. Yeah, the kids are having a good time too, I think. But
next, Terry Gilliam was offered the helming duties on the Addams Family, but he also ended up pulling out of the project before pre-production actually began. After the departure of these two legendary directors, I mean, my God, what this movie could have been like if it had just a little Fear and Loathing injected into it, if Gomez Addams just did a little ether before the mamushka. But yeah, the studio needed a new filmmaker who could take the reins in the 11th hour. Enter Barry Sonnenfeld, legendary director of Men in Black, Get Shorty, and Wild Wild West.
It's me, dear friend.
I kind of figured when I started research for this video that whoever directed the Addams Family must have been a pretty seasoned vet. I mean, this movie looks absolutely great and just feels like such a cozy, instant classic. And that's when I realized that, wow, Barry Sonnenfeld has a crazy-ass career too. Born in New York City in April of 1953, Sonnenfeld began his career like all modest NYU Jewish boys do, in the corn industry. After a few years working in the adult film world, Sonnenfeld began his prolific career not as a film director, but as a director of photography and cinematographer. It was at a Christmas party where Sonnenfeld met director Ethan Coen, who described the new film Blood Simple that he and his brother were putting together. Sonnenfeld was fascinated with the project and its directors, and so began a run of legendary films. Sonnenfeld had DP duties on Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, and Miller's Crossing, all classics from the Coen brothers. From there, Sonnenfeld's cinematography career really blossomed, taking over the camera for films like Misery, When Harry Met Sally, Throw Mama from the Train, and Big with Tom Hanks, which I will tell you right now is not a movie that has aged particularly well.
I'm a child, Susan. I'm not ready for all of this. I'm 13 years old.
Oh, and who isn't?
Hey, why don't you hang out, have a seat right on the other side of the bar for me, will you? Keep your hands out of your pockets for me.
Shockingly enough, the supposed seasoned director that I assumed had made the Addams Family was a cinematographer who had never even directed a movie, because 1991's The Addams Family is director Barry Sonnenfeld's first actual feature. Following the success of The Addams Family, Sonnenfeld would go on to make iconic 90s history with Men in Black and Get Shorty, before blowing the entire thing up with Wild Wild West and Be Cool.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
But yeah, first-time director Sonnenfeld really knocked this film out of the park, both aesthetically and conceptually. Like all of the best TV to movie adaptations of the 90s, The Addams Family utilized the emerging technology of the time to bring elements of the original show to life in all new ways. The best example of this is the incredible effects work used to bring Thing to the silver screen for the first time. The original Thing was only shot ever emerging from a box to keep the illusion alive, but utilizing green screen and CGI technology in its infancy, the directors were able to transform the hand of magician Christopher Hart into the iconic scurrying digits.
Thing, you're a handful.
Suddenly, the Addams Family had gone from relative obscurity back into the limelight, with not only Thing, but Morticia and Gomez Addams becoming iconic characters in the cultural lexicon as well. These two are just goth couple goals, still to this day.
Cara mia.
And late actor Raul Julia said that playing Gomez Addams was one of the most fulfilling roles of his entire career. Having once beamed that his entire life after making the movie, kids would still beg him to appear in character out in public as the famous father, something that really warmed Julia's heart. As we move on, we'll see plenty more series from the 60s being adapted into great films on this list, because that's simply the timing and the nostalgia wave that crashed down in the 90s on adults at the time. Financially and conceptually, it was the Addams Family's rollicking success that was the true kickoff to the fantastic trend that spawned the genre being covered in this video. All hail the Addams Family for reviving 60s TV hits. I mean, okay, I guess technically Tim Burton's Batman started that shit in 1989, and it unravels my whole thesis here, so we're skipping that. Anyway, speaking of Batman... Let's travel back once again to my idyllic and semi-spoiled childhood in 1993 to explore my daily ritual that had been ingrained into my schedule as a young tyke. Every day after school, I'd burst out of the school bus with my backpack whipping around in my arms, sprinting full speed to my front door to catch the first few minutes of my version of church. Elio's pizza hot and ready and in my hand, my homework conveniently thrown in the corner where it would be ignored until my bus ride the following morning. It was 4 p.m. in 1993, and that meant only one thing. Batman the Animated Series was on. The opening notes and images of this theme song still sets off so many dopamine grenades in my brain to this day. As Batman TAS forever holds a place in my heart as the finest adaptation of the character to ever leap off the comic page. And an absolutely iconic piece of DC storytelling that breezily earned the adjective timeless over the course of its several seasons. And then, in early 1993, commercials began to air for something that my young brain could not fathom. A Batman animated series motion picture. Now, I had gaggles of episodes of the show on VHS, posters, toys, the Batmobile. I mean, I was deeply obsessed with this series. So when the day came that I could actually head to the cinema with my grandparents to see this thing on the biggest screen possible, to say that I was elated was an understatement. I basically was shitting my pants, which at 6 was not only probable, but fully excusable. So yeah, I dragged my whole family to see this movie in theaters, and from the moment the lights dimmed and the music hit, I was presented with a Batman story that felt utterly larger than life. When this movie starts, you're slapped with this absolutely thunderous, choir-filled score that just has such a dark and foreboding presence to it. And it basically declares that this ain't your mama's Batman the Animated Series music. This was some actually terrifying, deeply dark themes right off the bat that set the tone for the rest of the film, which would be Warner Brothers' first PG-rated cartoon instead of G, a relatively large risk back in that period of time. So yeah, we're hit with this not only radical shift in the severity of the score, but we're also seeing this amazing rendered Gotham cityscape on some 90s early CGI shit, unlike anything we saw in the 2D hand-drawn cartoon. The actual story behind this opening is pretty crazy too, as all of these sweeping shots of Gotham had been created for an experiment for the TV series, as a potential way to cut costs on the background environments for the show. Really glad they never ended up using this technology, not only because it makes the opening to this film really stand out visually on its own, but also they ended up employing this method on the 90s Spider-Man animated TV show, and frankly, it looks like absolute shit. Anyway, from the get-go, you're already feeling this cinematic nature of this film, setting it apart from the usual episodic TV fare. And once again, a TV to film adaptation wisely ups the stakes from the show in ways that only a movie could. We have near character deaths for Batman and the Joker here. I mean, they actually had to write a follow-up comic book to even explain how Joker survived the events of this movie. The plot points of this film simply tested the very limits of both of these characters' wills. We have levels of violence, layers of thematic dread, and gut-wrenching plot points and twists that simply would never have made it to air on the Fox Kids network. One of my favorite books on Batman the Animated Series, Batman Animated, which was published in 1998, has a whole entire section of notes from the studio that would come raining down on the production team for the animated series, after the bigwigs would read a script for an upcoming episode. Sexual relationships, actual death, and violence considered too strong for TV were constant footnotes in the endless editing of the animated series, down from a PG-13 Batman story to tales that kids could consume without their parents blowing a gasket. After all, a whole generation just had been terrorized by Batman Returns. So there was some goodwill to build back up here. So it's just awesome that we have this kind of story from the same universe as the Almost Got 'Em Kids Audio cassette bedtime tape, taking on this dark, depressive retooling of Batman Year 1 and Year 2 combined. I doubt anyone from the time could forget this utter masterpiece of a poster for this film popping up around cinemas everywhere, with this foreboding image of the Phantasm just looming over Batman's whole world. We didn't have any idea who this villain was going into this film, with the Phantasm's design and general father-daughter relationship story being lifted from the Reaper, the classic Batman villain from the Batman Year 2 comic series, as well as the visual design of the Mask of Azrael, one of the most mysterious characters in the Batman universe as well. And yeah, this might be a good time to mention, if you haven't seen Batman Mask of the Phantasm, stop this video now before I spoil the ever-living heck out of this film. Go watch it right now. It's easily the best on-screen portrayal of Batman's origin and pathos ever committed to the silver screen. This is such a well-rounded, brilliant take on Batman's whole world and sense of purpose that it's literally essential viewing to anyone who could even remotely claim themselves as a fan of The Dark Knight. And the villain of this piece, mwah! Kino, baby. I love the Phantasm. I love how the reveal of Bruce Wayne's lost love as his greatest enemy is just such a rich twist on how the identity of Batman has just infected Bruce Wayne's entire life, toxifying even something as pure as his first love into something that would eventually come back to haunt him. Usually villains from the Batman animated series were at their best when the tragedy of their background drove them to utter madness. And there is this beautiful symmetry of Andrea's arc in this film as a microcosm for so many of Batman's tragic rogues gallery. A tale of revenge that twisted a regular woman into the heartless killing machine who had to hide behind a mask. Concurrently to this tragedy, you have Batman's Citizen Kane-esque arc of sadness playing out in both flashbacks and in real time. as Bruce's own quest for revenge has seemingly consumed him over the course of his career of crime fighting, and left him loveless, hunted by the police, and utterly alone. And then wow, in this pit of depression that consumes the victims and heroes of Gotham City equally, you throw in the Joker like a lit match onto a barrel of oil next to Rachel's head. This dude is so unhinged in this movie, and he just tears down everything around him just for the fun of it. And he has a great time doing it. I love it when villains love their job. You gotta love what you do. This is by far, without a doubt, Mark Hamill's crowning achievement as the Joker.
Don't touch me, old man. I don't know where you've been.
With some of the laughs in this film teetering into an absolute insanity that gives me goosebumps to this day. What you have here is a bold, brilliant, brazen Batman story with a wholly original villain, an incredibly satisfying Joker arc, a pitch-perfect and nostalgia-soft retelling of Bruce Wayne's formative years, and just one of the most powerful and balanced Batman stories ever made. Sure, the creative team behind this film had made a bevy of perfect Batman stories leading up to this. But again, there's something so unique, cinematic, and severe about this story.
Let me go or we'll both die! Whatever it takes!
It cuts like a knife and puts Batman up against the wall, against the police, in ways that we had never seen in the animated series. The best TV to film adaptations are the ones that shatter the rules of the TV format, either through content, seriousness, or scope. And Batman, Mask of the Phantasm from 1993 is a perfect example of how to break down these walls in all the best, most satisfying ways possible. If you've watched other episodes of the Movie Blues Show on my channel, then you'd know that for some of these larger projects, I always like to explore a film that I've never seen somewhere in the mess of ones that I have. For this project, I zeroed in on one of the most popular TV to film adaptations of the 90s, and a film that I had never seen. Cut to 1993's Academy Award-winning The Fugitive.
Oh, Jesus. What do you weigh? God! What color was his hair?
From the director of Under Siege and the writer of Chronicles of Riddick. And one of those is a good movie. And it's the one starring Vin Diesel.
Talk to me, baby. Tell me your story. Tell me yours. Let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's go have lunch.
So yeah, The Fugitive is a movie that I've seen parodied, referenced, and praised for many years. After all, this movie dethroned fellow listie The Addams Family to be crowned the highest grossing TV adaptation ever. And The Fugitive is also the only film on this list to earn a bevy of Academy Award nominations and wins. And yeah, it's honestly a pretty hilarious and terrible movie. If you want a good movie where Harrison Ford plays a surgeon, watch Polanski's Frantic, because this movie kind of sucks. Back in the yesteryear of the 1990s, we didn't have John Wick-style revenge movies every week, with the guy from Better Call Saul, or an old guy, or now there's one with the Grammy, and then there's one with an Indian monkey boy, and then a chick, and then another chick, and then another chick, and then one other chick. But what we did have were awesome techno crime thrillers like Disclosure and The Net and The Firm and The Fugitive, where rich and silly white dudes would get caught up in the world of high-priced corporate crime, have to go on the run, go rogue, and prove their innocence.
I feel I have to report this criminal behavior.
You almost got away with it, didn't you?
The resulting delays will actually increase the costs by more than 70%.
I assure you, I had no idea any of this was going on when I joined the firm.
I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of this speech.
I can't use your invoices.
And that's why we're getting dirt in the split optics, in the drive arms, the chip joints.
You switched the samples.
In some cases, massive overbilling.
I know all about it.
The third memo regarding the Singapore supplies
your
is not...
responsibility, not mine.
After Lentz died, you were the only one who had the access.
You reversed everything they've done to you. Taken back your life. That's what you wanted, wasn't it?
And The Fugitive, I guess, was the king of that genre because it got a ton of critical acclaim and is considered generally iconic. And yeah, it's the last movie to be ever nominated for Best Picture that starred Harrison Ford to this day. Sorry to that fucking CGI dog movie. Nice try though, looked like nightmare fuel. No thank you. And sure, it's an adaptation of a show, once again like the Flintstones or the Addams Family from the 1960s. And yeah, The Fugitive ran for 4 seasons with 120 51-minute episodes. And you can probably guess which 2 people decided to not waste 121 hours of their life watching the Fugitive TV series as research. That would be me and Harrison Ford. One of the few times you could group these 2 people together. He said he never watched the show because it was on when he was in college and he had better things to do.
Well, first of all, I never have seen an episode of The Fugitive all the way through, so I couldn't.
And I'm going to pull the same card because I also have better things to do.
Inhale!
Like watching this movie in 2024, which was a bit odd for sure. Not entirely sure that this movie demands a revisit, so let me give you the highlights so you never end up wasting $11 on the 3 for $33 Amazon flash sale for 4K Blu-rays like I did. I guess the transfer was pretty nice though. So this movie starts with this like epically fonted title sequence, which is actually the same font as the squishy sections of movie posters, which I found weird. It's also like the color or the font from Star Trek The Next Generation, from their titles. Anyway, the first 4 minutes of this movie with credits very quickly set up the brutal murder of the wife of Ford's Dr. Dick Kimball. His swift arrest and even swifter incarceration. And then 13 minutes into this movie, what? After the credits have already stopped, Ford is already like in prison. Suddenly, the credits start again, which made me feel like I had literally been sucked into some kind of fucking time vortex. I mean, what in God's green was the idea behind this? Okay, guys, we're now 15 minutes into the motion picture, and the credits are still rolling. Anyway, Ford escapes this whole prison bus train situation and becomes the titular fugitive.
And oh God, editor's note, I mean, look at this special effect frame by frame of Harrison Ford, who I think is made out of clay or something in this. Jumping off of one miniature as it hits another, he's superimposed in, I guess. I don't know. He's like a very weird Gumby person. What is this?
And I was shocked that all of this took place over a major vehicle crash because while I hadn't seen The Fugitive, I have seen its sequel, U.S. Marshals, like 40 times because it played nonstop on HBO when I was a kid. And like, these are the same friggin' movie, almost beat for beat. Anyway, Ford escapes. It's like 17 minutes into this movie, and Harrison Ford has fully gone on trial for murdering his wife. We've seen the night of the murder from his point of view, the crime scene investigation, the entire court trial, and Ford in prison being transported on a bus, all within the first 15 minutes of a 2-hour movie. The pacing is very odd in this movie in terms of the tension and believability of pretty much everything going on. And you may be wondering, if this all happens in the first 15 minutes and then Ford escapes, what is he going to do for 2 hours? And the answer is not much. He spends the movie shacking up with different weirdos and like doing the bare minimum amount of police work that the cops should have absolutely done in the first place. I mean, Ford was rich as shit. He probably had a bomb-ass attorney, and I truly cannot fathom why nobody bothered investigating, I don't know, the one-armed man who Dick Kimball saw slaying his hot wife, played by Celia Ward, who's very hot. Like, when Ford gets out, he's basically, like, obsessively breaking into hospitals so he can, like, Google one-armed men.
It wasn't me. It was the one-armed man.
It's really too late for this man. I mean, why didn't you read some law books and organize this all from prison?
Convicted of a crime I didn't even commit.
Seems like you're committing 100,000 extra new crimes here and nearly committing unalivicide in your quest for justice. You should have just thought this out, Dick. This all could have been achieved if you just, like, got an expensive lawyer from prison, Dick. Read a book, Dick. Oh no, he's reading a book about one-armed men. I mean, this man breaks out of prison and just spends his time being a straight-up weirdo. Which is not aided by the fact that Harrison Ford is mumbling his way through much of this movie.
Help you?
El lugar incorrecto, gracias.
What?
as apparently both he and Tommy Lee Jones improvised almost all their dialogue. And man, oh man, that brings me to Academy Award winner Tommy Lee Jones. This guy I thought was going to be delivering like some kind of stoic, intense performance, but nope. He's just Big Tommy Two-Face again. We get dialed up, methed out scarecrow Tommy Lee just shambling his way across this movie like an absolute lunatic.
I come there and turn off the water.
Tommy Lee Jones and his fellow police mates, featuring Rose from Lost and Joey Pants from The Matrix, is a crew of people who simply love their jobs too much.
Yeah, you've been right before.
All right.
Back in the 90s, I think they were glorifying this new, hot FBI culture where you could be a cop and just be so cool because you hated crime so much.
Well, think me up a cup of coffee and a chocolate donut with some of those little sprinkles on top, will you, as long as you're thinking?
And man, oh man, do these guys hate crime. They get off hard on their hunt for Dick, and it's absolutely batshit at times. I mean, Tommy Lee is like shooting in a public area out of sheer rage here. This dude absolutely lives to hunt people and doesn't give a single fuck about right or wrong.
I didn't kill my wife. I don't care.
Well, here are 7 warning signs that you should get a new job.
He just loves hunting Dick. And that's the movie. There's like a solid 50 minutes of these two playing like De Niro and Pacino from Heat if both of them had traumatic brain injuries. Like Harrison Ford's first moves when he breaks out of the slammer are just moronic. He steals an ambulance and goes on a full GTA chase with helicopters and cop cars going after him. I mean, this plan could have literally failed before it left step 1. Get a lawyer and read a book in prison, Dick, please. Anyway, this was like a really hilarious movie. Not hilarious enough that I would suggest watching it, but it defied belief and logic many separate times. And in 2024, anyone acting like Harrison Ford would have been caught in 20 minutes and filled with a battalion of bullets. Other than Harrison Ford's fierce-ass beard, this movie kind of sucks. And the most iconic shot of the entire film is hilariously bad.
Look at this dude. Wait till you see the... No.
So yeah, you're welcome. I watched The Fugitive, and now no one ever has to do that again. Now let's move back onto the movies I love, and that merit true respect, and that are serious pieces of cinematic art. The Flintstones, dead the Flintstones, dead the average Stone Age family. And I'm not here to defend them. The Flintstones is not a movie that I'm going to convince you is pure uncut kino. There's such an obvious corporate bent to the whole process of devising and writing this movie. I mean, this wasn't no mom and pop operation shot by an art house production company. This movie was pure distilled economics, a massive advertisement for McDonald's.
4 uniquely chiseled Bedrock mugs.
These will look great with my bone china.
And was met with critical vitriol from day one.
Boy, I really didn't like this picture. I mean, it looks great, but these characters in this story, what a crushing bore.
I was disappointed in it, too, and I agree with you. It's a great-looking production.
Yes.
In particular, I think it's a movie that kids might go to.
Right.
And what do kids care about? Office politics,
Right.
hanky-panky with the secretary,
Yes.
adoption problems,
Yes.
mother-in-law problems, embezzlement. Kids don't know what embezzlement is.
I'm not here to defend director Barry Levant, who went on to direct the prequel film Viva Suck Vegas. And then only the worst movies you've ever seen in your life, including Jingle All the Way with Schwarzenegger and Snow Dogs with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Are We There Yet with Ice Cube. Somehow that's like the most successful thing he's ever done. Although I will say, while researching this project, I got to know a lot more about Brian Levant. And while he's made some truly awful movies, he's also a renowned and avid toy and memorabilia collector, amassing huge collections of everything from the Flintstones to other movie properties that he's made, like, Jingle All the Way.
A film about finding the hottest Christmas toy of the year and the search for it. And in doing so,
I had the opportunity to create an entire line of toys, which now sit in my shelves.
So I guess if you look at the Flintstones movie from a more toy-centered collector brain point of view, it's actually a really cool and kitschy movie, which I guess you could knock it for these things.
More attention has been paid to the gadgets in this film than to the lead characters, like this prehistoric garbage disposal.
Why throw good money down the drain?
But as a toy collector myself, I kind of latched onto this dude's spirit here, even though his movies are... Nor am I here to defend the group of maniacs known in the industry at the time as the Flintstone 8. This included Neil Thompson, Al Idikman, Cindy Bagel, Lloyd Garver, David Silverman, and Steven Susterik, as well as Nancy Stern. No, this isn't the list from Warner's Cottage during Shabbat services. This is the massive list of writers who worked on this script as it was developed from 1985 all the way up to 1993. And according to actor Rick Moranis, who sat in on many of the writing sessions predating the film, up to 18 writers were involved in the translation of the Hanna-Barbera classic from TV to movie screen. What I am here to do is to tell you that despite all this, the Flintstones movie friggin' rules, baby.
Wilma, I'm home!
This movie is just a perfect amalgamation of emerging 90s special effects, incredible actors giving iconic performances, and a prehistoric helping of satire, wit, and homages to the original series. If you had to make a live-action Flintstones movie, I really cannot imagine doing it in any other way than this. I mean, they spent $15 million to build Bedrock in full, the Flintstones' iconic Jurassic neighborhood, and the level of physical effort it took to shoot this movie really shows. This is the kind of old-fashioned movie shoot where none of the actors were allowed to wear shoes because Bedrock citizens were barefooters, something that led to glass being banned on the entire set for the duration of the shoot. And I feel like, yeah, they just wouldn't go that far in this day and age. This would all be shot on the volume with like 1.5 tons of concrete sand. On the special effects side of things, this movie's practical creatures were handled by the Jim Henson Company. And the film's CGI creatures, like Dino, were created by Industrial Light and Magic. And that's just a real potent, excellent combination of talent that ended up producing some positively iconic and groundbreaking inventions for this film. The saber-toothed tiger, for example, may not look great, but it was the first CGI creature ever rendered with fur, with ILM inventing its first complex algorithm for creating digital hair fibers solely for this film. So you can thank the wizards here for pioneering the Rock's ponytail in Mummy 2 Scorpion Guy. Like all movies in this retrospective, the Flintstones movie attempted the relatively impossible by taking something small-scale, decades old, and trapped by the TV format, and then just breathing millions of dollars, creativity, and life into it. Only a couple years earlier, the world went crazy for the first appearance of CGI dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And with the Flintstones, my childhood mind was entirely rewired over the immersion I felt as I spent an hour and a half in a fully realized, sun-bleached bedrock full of creatures, crazy vehicles, freaky food, and a whole lot of yabba-dabba-doo!
That's Fred Flintstone, and he talks.
Wilma! Fred!
You're my best pal.
And you're my best pal, Fred.
Talking Fred Flintstone says 4 phrases when you hug him.
I like to be hugged.
And yeah, while he looks utterly miserable at times in this, and while I don't think many of the actors look back fondly on this film at all.
For you, what was just the highlight of doing this picture?
Boy, that's a tough question.
I still love John Goodman's performance as Fred. Whether he likes it or not, whether he was blacked out or not, it's pretty iconic, and he absolutely nails all of the ins and outs of the Stone Age mind.
It's perfect.
Rick Moranis shines as well, as always, and even Rosie O'Donnell puts on a pretty empathetic performance as the lowly housewife Betty, watching her lower middle-class life just crumble.
There seems to be a slight problem with your credit card. It's no damn good.
And speaking of lower middle class, this movie is also an absolute hoot for adults, offering up this satirical outlook on blue-collar life and the generally imposing takeover of corporate shills that tainted the workforce of the 80s and 90s. You have Kyle MacLachlan playing this absolutely devious corporate bigwig, And yeah, any chance to see this guy chewing scenery is good in my book. And don't forget about Halle Berry's performance here, which single-handedly pushed me through puberty at light speed.
I'd work now, wouldn't you?
I don't know, even Elizabeth Taylor is great in this movie. Like, what?
Let's not let a little thing like this spoil the party.
So yeah, hate it all you want. Point out that it was just a chance for McDonald's to sell 1 billion more Happy Meals. But there is such a place and time and vibe of this movie that I just love. It's like the Addams Family plus dinosaurs, with maybe more of a caveman brain than that movie had, but still. The Flintstones movie is a hoot, and compared to what we consider to be dreck in this day and age, like the Emoji Movie, or some such other soulless cash grab about Cheetos or Pop-Tarts or Nikes, this movie actually has enough original ideas, satire, and creative visual effects to balance the scale of consumerism, enough for me to feel like I'm not watching Mac and Me. Anyway, if you haven't seen this movie, I would suggest watching it as an adult. I mean, why not? You can't live your life without seeing every Rick Moranis role, and neither can I. So go watch this one before you write it off as extinct. Remember back when our favorite series, full of our favorite characters that we had been following since our childhood, was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of an OP, purple-skinned menace, who brought our heroes to their knees with a complicated and dastardly plan aimed at eradicating most of the people of Earth.
No, we ain't talking about Thanos, fools. It's Morphin time.
Let's do it, guys! Right. It's Morphin time!
In 1995, I dragged my parents to the cinema to experience one of the most iconic TV to film adaptations for any kid growing up in the early 90s, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie. Now, by this point, I was obsessed with the Power Rangers. I had all the toys in this crazy-ass rubber carrying case. I had the games on everything from Game Gear to Super Nintendo to Tiger. And yeah, I was a Red Ranger boy for life. And a truly Power Ranger-obsessed preteen who lived to see the Rangers kicking putty ass and taking kaiju names. This was before Pokemon, before every single person online was a weeb looking for a waifu in between Crunchyroll binges. This was the golden time of entertainment, where if you had a popular Japanese product and wanted to bring it to America, you'd have to reskin the thing, whitewash that John, and change all the dialogue to the Lord's language American English. And it was during the height of this obsession, the zenith of Power Rangers mania, that I went with my family to the Big Boy movie theater to see the Big Boy Power Rangers throw down for the first time on the big screen. 2 hours later, I stumbled out of the Power Rangers movie, my brain pummeled into ecstasy, my mind racing at how many new toys and games I was going to buy to chase the dopamine high that this movie injected into my eyeballs. I was sure, more than anything ever before, that I had seen a masterpiece. My parents, however, offered a far more balanced perspective on the experience. I remember my dad complaining that his head was literally throbbing as we were leaving the theater. He didn't understand the first thing about what he had seen, and he was every bit as unclear as to what a Zord was then than when he had walked in. I think a combination of terrible CGI monsters, horrific musical cuts, and absolutely awful acting had left its indelible mark on dear old Dad. For once, it seemed like he had fallen asleep in a movie on purpose as a method of self-shielding instead of his normal doze-offs. But I just distinctly remember, being so confused as to how a person could not like this movie. I mean, what was my dad smoking? Over the years, that fog of confusion has surely lifted, because as a 36-year-old adult, I mean, I don't know, I might be 37 when I'm done editing this video, but as an adult, holy shit, this movie's a rough watch.
We need some light.
Activating power beam.
I mean, even compared to other bad movies on this list, like the Flintstones, this movie is still so undeniably boneheaded.
Who's in charge around here, huh?
But no matter what it looks like now, no matter how easy it is to laugh at, this whole entire thing, the Power Rangers movie, was an experience. And a lot of what was successful about this film for me, a lot of what made this experience downright religious at the time, can once again be attributed to a movie that took everything great about the TV show that it was based on, and then dialed it up to 11,000 million. Obviously, it's a major qualifying feature of any movie in this video that the show the movie was based on was probably mired with visual, budgetary, and creative restrictions, and was finally allowed to be free in the film format. And there simply is not a show with more restrictions on it than the original Power Rangers series. Not only did the show have to abide by strict kid-friendly rules, but it also had a budget tighter than King Charles trying to escape a Chinese finger trap. So, as many of you probably already know, the show itself was cobbled together using the footage from several of the popular Super Sentai TV shows from Japan. Anytime there was action of any kind in the show, it would flip over to this grainy footage, which felt like weirdly disconnected from the rest of the episode. The American Power Rangers TV team would then have to pitch and build episodes and storylines based on already existing fight scenes from an entirely different show, from an entirely different time period, shot on entirely different film, from an entirely different country. And even as a kid, I could tell there was something wonky and imported about the Power Rangers show. Like you'd never see them with their outfits on without a mask, and you never saw them during the fights outside of their costumes. It felt weird, and it was hampered by a lot of different factors, both internally and externally. So the movie, which was the first Power Rangers property not to feature any pre-existing footage from Super Sentai, was truly the first fully American Power Ranger production. And like most things that are homegrown in America, this movie was bigger, louder, and dumber than the series could ever imagine.
Taking care of business.
But like, inside this CGI slop fest, there is a movie that just feels so earnest, so full of childlike wonder, a movie so in tune with its core audience and unwilling to budge on even its most ludicrous concepts, and that just rules. For me, as a kid, when the CGI Zords finally threw down in the city at the end of this movie, I mean, wow, mind blown. Not only was I down to clown with any CGI monster mashes after loving things like the Flintstones and Jurassic Park, but the show had spent so much of its runtime in this stiff, admittedly awesome, but still man-in-suit designs that just felt, once again, kind of restricted. Sure, this looks like shit now. But on a movie screen, for the first time in 1995, the sequence was nothing less than a revelation. And the final throwdown is just one of the many aspects that escalate the Power Rangers film over the show both visually and conceptually. Everything in this movie gets this awesome, sleek, but familiar redesign. Even Alpha secured a glow-up. My boy shining. Bigger ideas that always seemed bound by the TV format, like the physical presence of Zordon, who, up until this film, was just this dude's potato face floating over everybody, came to life in ways that we could only imagine up until then. Finally, we could see the cast mixed up in the actual fight scenes, which could take place in different and interesting locales, and not just at a sad gray factory somewhere in Japan. And to those whining about the lack of practical effects at the end of this movie, at least we have this awesome bone dinosaur sequence. They never could have done this in the show. Speaking of things that they couldn't do in the show, holy shit, between this woman and Halle Berry from the Flintstones, and sure, throw in the chick from the Land of the Lost, the 90s had some serious prehistoric baddies. God damn.
Who is she?
Oh my gosh.
Pinch me. I must have died and gone to heaven.
Careful, Kevin. You're starting to drool.
So sue me.
They were also able to finally kick things up a notch in this movie, marking the first time that blood is seen in the Power Rangers. And the bad guys actually use the word kill when referring to the Rangers, which was a first for the show as well. I know these seem like small things, but they add up to a more impactful and memorable whole, as the series leapt to something more edgy, dangerous, and extreme.
Talk about a splitting headache.
And nothing is more friggin' extreme than the purple penetrator, the violet violator, the plum bum, the slimy and crimey and most insidious threat to the Rangers yet, Ivan Ooze, baby! There isn't a soul alive from the 90s who doesn't remember this goofy-ass slime wizard. I love the choice by the filmmakers to ditch the usual villains in the series, who, admittedly at this point, were acting like divorced elderly idiots to each other anyway. And sure, I think maybe this movie could have benefited from a more restrained performance here.
Show it to your parents. Show it to your friends. When you've got your ooze, the fun never ends.
Originally, Ivan Ooze was considered for Christopher Walken, Phil Collins, John Voight, Dennis Hopper, Bob Hoskins, Tim Curry, and Danny DeVito, as well as Christopher Lloyd and Mr. Bean. all of which would have made this movie even more priceless, but I guess English actor Paul Freeman hammed it up pretty good. He's doing a real, Episode 3 Sheev Palpatine mixed with, twerking Thanos bit that I appreciate. This is a greatly unhinged performance in a pretty ramshackle kids movie, but from the lens of the Power Rangers TV series, Ivan Ooze was a different breed than the usual.
Just to give you a few hints, we've got new villains, we got new suits, we got new sets, we got new everything. Special effects in this thing, new Zords, we got all of them.
After all, the villains on Power Rangers had their footage culled from the Japanese show, so they were either fully dubbed, like Rita Repulsa, or they were just a big rubber-suited guy throwing his hands up in the air with ADR. Finally, we had a real tangible villain who existed in the same physical space as the Rangers, who was played by an actor who actually sorta knew he was in a Power Rangers movie, which at least elevated the movie over the show's dramatic villainy, or lack thereof. Even though the directors of this movie did not watch the show it was based on, even though half the cast of the show ended up not being invited to be in the movie, even though fan favorites Bulk and Skull had an entire filmed plotline that ended up on the cutting room floor,
Bunch of goody goods about to get creamed by pies, Daddy.
even though this movie, oddly enough, is not part of the established canon of the show and exists in a vacuum by itself away from the series, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie still felt like the culmination, the celebration, and the escalation of the TV series in a way that utterly suplexed my nerd soul as a kid. This is what the TV to movie adaptation is all about. Case closed. Movie is a stone cold classic and is terrible but awesome and pretty much garbage, but I love garbage. And this is the most raddest, most gnarliest sequence ever. You cannot outrad these bros and chicks, dudes. Wow, cowabunga. This movie is perfect 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, both audience and critical reception, and I will hear nothing less than praise.
With built-in Karate Shop sound effects, just squeeze the button, turn on the TV, protect your lamp, and shine it anywhere to summon other Rangers.
Behind
Power Ranger.
Everybody's smiling, sunshine day, everybody sing.
Here's the story of a boy named DS, whose great uncle, Sherwood Schwartz, was the creator of The Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island. And in 1995, when the Brady Bunch movie finally hit cinemas, young DS and his family were beaming with pride. Because unlike the other films on this list, the Brady Bunch movie just hits close to home for me because it's made by my family. Yes, this is the ultimate example of my connection to the TV to film adaptations of the 90s. A bond that was beyond simple fandom because the Brady Bunch were part of our family. My great-uncle Sherwood and his son Lloyd are often considered by Hollywood historians as some of the biggest TV and film producers in history, and are absolutely considered to be the most successful father-son producing duo ever. And in 1995, when the lights dimmed in the cinema and the Brady Bunch came to life on our silver screen, the Lyons clan finally saw decades of hard work and dedication from their relatives hit an all-time high. Seeing my Uncle Sherwood and my cousin Lloyd's name in the credits that day was a feeling I would never forget, and it just filled me with a sense of awe and a feeling of pride for my family that I would relish until this very day. So, when I began this project, a huge point of interest for me would be covering the Brady Bunch movie. A film that used sharp satire, spot-on casting, and the hilarious hijinks of a family trapped in the bell-bottom world of the 70s as they come head-to-head with the grungy and tubular world of the 90s.
All right, everybody out. This is a car, Jack.
Well, of course this is a car. But my name's not Jack. It's Greg.
My first thought was to reach out to Cousin Lloyd, producer of the film, to talk about the first Brady Bunch film to hit cinemas and change everything in the 90s. After all, my late great-uncle Sherwood was a hero to all of us, a man who, in his 95 years on Earth, changed the world of TV and media forever. Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch would become two of the largest syndicated shows in history, spawning books, musicals, plays, movies, sequels, and reboots that are still being produced to this day. I wanted to talk to Lloyd about his father's legacy, about the legacy of the Brady Bunch movie, and about how one father and son in California used their talent, wit, and tenacity to change the history of Hollywood forever. But like all great stories in Hollywood, not everything is as it seems. And as my interview with Lloyd crept closer and my research into the Brady movie hit full steam ahead, I found out that Lloyd and Sherwood were disrespected, ignored, led by the nose, and discarded by the studios and director working on the project. Found inside of this book, Brady, 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 which was written by Lloyd and his father Sherwood, was a story about how the creators of the Brady Bunch were left by the wayside as the movie jumped into production.
Your designs are from another time.
I've always thought of my style as classic as well.
This is a story of how in Hollywood, even your own creation can be taken away from you and made into something you can't control. Even though the Brady movie was great, how did the creators of this property feel when the movie was taken away from them and sent in a totally different direction? So without further ado, please enjoy this abridged discussion between myself and my cousin Lloyd, a producer, director, dialogue coach, and screenwriter for the Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island, as well as the author of several plays, books, and over 100 screenplays, as we discuss the Schwartz family's fraught relationship to the 1995 comedy TV adaptation classic, The Brady Bunch movie.
I like your house. That's by your house behind you.
Yeah, I wanted to, set the interview in somewhere you may find familiar or comfortable. So I am thrilled to be sitting down with you today. You are Lloyd Schwartz. You are the producer, director, writer, dialogue coach of film, TV, and theater. And mostly what we wanted to talk about here today was your involvement and your father's involvement, who is my great uncle, in the Brady Bunch, one of the most famous TV shows of all time. Thank you for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's great to talk to you.
First things first, I did have a very concise interview where I wanted to ask you questions, mostly about what was the topic of my video, which are very famous 90s television to movie adaptations, Addams Family, Mission Impossible, things like that. Of course, the Brady Bunch came up. Of course, that was the first thing I thought of. And I planned a whole interview with a set of questions to discuss your great times with the Brady Bunch movie, your involvement in that picture. And then I read this book, Brady, 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 a wonderful book that I suggest anybody who is interested in TV or film to check out. This was written by Lloyd and his father, and is the, quote, real story of the Brady Bunch, which is a story that has been told from many different angles, many different times, but it was amazing to read your point of view on all of this. So that was great, but it flipped my whole interview upside down because really,
I don't know whether I'm sorry about that or not. So
basically in reading the book, came to find out that, your relationship to the specific Brady Bunch movie was not quite the smooth sailing ride that it made it seem when I saw your name, flash in the credits of the movie when I was a kid. I thought, wow, he must have been there every day. He must have seen everything. They must have asked him his opinion and his father's opinion on the things that they created and respected that and yada, yada, yada. Well, like I said, I read the Brady, Brady, Brady book, and that has a very different story in it.
Yes.
So before we talk about the movie, which really, was the central topic, not so much, unfortunately, anymore, because as we'll get to, your involvement in that was, I'd say fraught, maybe. How would you describe it?
Disappointing. I was ultimately proud of the movie.
Sure.
But it could have been a lot different, probably a lot better.
Right.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, in reading the book, you see, especially in and around the movie, that you struggled so much to get the ideas that you had come up with, the more satirical elements, the more respectful elements to the Brady mythology, to the series, that you pushed so hard that the DNA of those choices did come through. I mean, when I saw the movie, I didn't love it because I was remembering Brady episodes. I loved it because you had taken this idea of the 70s perfectionist family and kind of put it up in the mirror against the ugliness of the 90s, the grunginess of the 90s. Mm-hmm. And those were ideas that I think really seemed like they were seeded by you at the time. And, no matter how many studio changes and things like that happened, I think that, while you said it was ultimately disappointing, your tenacity in pushing some of those concepts did eventually break through and did leave its mark. It's just, I guess sad.
Well, let me just interrupt for one thing. I didn't say that the movie was disappointing. My experience was disappointing.
Sure.
Ultimately, I thought the movie was pretty good. I think the probably I can best describe that in terms of how it all came about.
Right.
Dad and I were both close to Brandon Tartikoff. We had done other shows with him, other movies, and I had been an executive with him over at ABC. He became president of Paramount. And at that time, they were starting to do movies based upon TV shows. And he thought Brady would be a good one. So he called us up and said, we want to do a Brady Bunch movie. And then Dad and I got together, and we immediately realized that there was just 6 kids in a house. That really wasn't going to be a movie. And he had said that before that, there had been a Real Live Brady Bunch, was a show that was did episodes and did them satirically. And that as a theater piece. And it was very successful. And so I said, we'll do a movie, but it's got to be a satire. And then we called Brandon up and said to Brandon, we'll do a Brady Bunch movie for you, but it has to be a satire. And he, in his wisdom, said, I don't care. Because he thought the title was enough to make a successful movie.
Sure.
But we were given the go-ahead to do this satirical movie. And so Dad and I wrote the movie that we wanted to do, which was different than the movie that was in the theaters. It was kind of a Desperate Hours, where some bad guys get into the Brady house, and eventually the Brady house.
Yeah.
It was very funny. It was very funny. We thought it was very funny.
Right.
Paramount thought it was very funny.
Sure.
And Paramount gave it a green light. And we were very excited. We're going to make the movie that we wanted to make, and everything was great. And then, as what happens in Hollywood, the president of the studio was deposed.
Yeah.
And they brought in a new president of the studio. Even though we had a green light to make that movie, that president, who was Sherry Lansing, looked at the title page of the Brady Bunch movie and said, these guys are too close to it, and threw the script out without reading it.
Wow.
And so I begged the executive we were working with, would she at least read the coverage of the movie, which summarized it and gave opinions and said we should make this movie immediately and all that. And that executive said to me, there was no coverage. I had seen the coverage, and he, protecting his job, they threw it out because he didn't want to face down his president.
Right.
So they brought in other people who wrote a very slashing satire of the Brady Bunch.
Sure.
Our movie, and the concept eventually even convinced everyone, our movie was what we called an affectionate satire. And just the business of what we were trying to do, we wanted people that love the Brady Bunch to do what you talked before, see the movie and love it. And people who didn't like the Brady Bunch, we wanted them to also like the movie.
Right.
Because it made fun of the Brady Bunch.
Sure.
So we were going to get everybody. But they wrote this other movie, and we were producers of the movie anyway. And so we wrote a letter. In those days, it was probably a fax we had our attorney write a letter saying Paramount owned the copyright, and they could do whatever movie they want. But we as individuals didn't like what was happening, and we would fight every way we could to stop that movie from being done.
Right.
Which was pretty bold. That's Dad's tenacious nature.
Sure.
And they saw that the one thing they didn't want, and we said, we're going to go on every talk show we can find telling people not to see this movie.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't like that idea very much. So they changed it tone-wise into what we originally wanted and into the movie you saw, even though we didn't write it. The tone was all of that. So when you see that movie, that was the tone. That's affectionate satire. And it was Brady's versus the modern whatever. And it was very successful. So that's the history. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I mean, I think what you're describing, the affectionate satire, is a really interesting take, because there are so many satires of older works that come off more malicious and less caring. And when I watched the Brady Bunch movie as a kid, I wasn't laughing fully at the Bradys. I mean, yeah, it was kitschy and they acted strange, but it seemed as if they were still kind of the best of us. It really, when I think back on that movie, it's very similar to kind of the Addams Family movie from 91, where you have the characters, they're living in a world that does not look the same as the one that they were in before, but still the heart of those characters is kind of retained. And I think that the Brady Bunch movie really nailed that. And I really love also the cast of the movie. They seem, especially like Gary Cole, seem very into what they're doing in a non-ironic way. It wasn't like what, you know, everything I read about Robert Reed in this book kind of led you to believe that you had somebody on board that didn't want to be on the ship. I took your suggestion in the book. You said, if you want a movie to go watch The Brady Bunch in the White House, because that at least was you getting to write for the new cast. And while that movie, I mean, you know, I watched it after the first two movies, just kind of to get the full picture. While it's obviously more of a TV movie, it's kind of tooled down to a smaller scope. It's really like this crazy movie in and of itself. And I suggest to anybody also who loves the old Brady Bunch, the new Brady Bunch, to try to seek that one out, because that was, if you ever want to see Mike Brady being sworn in next to Bush and Clinton on stage at the inauguration, then you've only got one movie to watch. And I know you had written that one. Maybe that one did that. The experience of making that film kind of heal the wound a little bit with the new cast?
Yeah, it was very cleansing. Yes, you're right.
Good. I'm glad you had.
I'll tell you one thing about when you were talking about the cast. And first of all, I love working very much with, I really had a chance to work with Gary Cole and Shelley Long, and really very professional, really good actors, good people. We had a great time.
Sure.
That's not who I would have cast in the Brady Bunch movie.
Right.
I did not want people to do impressions of Mike and Carol. I wanted, who I wanted was, for Carol, I wanted Madonna.
All right. I remember I read that and I was like, whoa, that's a different movie.
Yeah.
And
I was faced down again by the other producers, you know, the people who they wanted to produce the movie, and it wasn't us. They said, yeah, but Madonna's like a big star. And I said, well, we're a big movie star. Well, I said, we're making a movie.
Yeah, here we go. Is our shot.
And I wanted like her, Madonna, and Kevin Nealon would have been my favorite choice.
Kevin Nealon would have been great. He would have been hilarious as it. Yeah.
Right. And I thought we would have had even a bigger audience. The movie was a big hit, but I thought it would double the amount of money. And but that said, when we went the way of impressions, I thought Gary did extraordinarily well, as did Shelley Long.
Right. I absolutely crack up every time Gary winds up to do one of his paternal speeches to the family.
I will talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, please.
That kind of was my way of getting back at Robert Reed.
Oh, okay.
Because I would crack up on the original Brady series when he would start one of those, and I'd have to leave the set because that's his lectures to me were just such a crock. So, and maybe it was a way of getting back at Dad, because Dad was a lot of ways like Mike Brady. So maybe, I don't know, we put all that into it. But the sincerity which Gary approached those speeches was great.
Speaking of relating Sherwood to Mike Brady himself, what I find fascinating about the Brady Bunch legacy, also knowing you guys and knowing the family to some extent, is that you have this story of this super creative, motivated family creating music and solving problems together as this unit that always rallies around their father. And it just feels, maybe I'm reading it wrong, like in some way, it's a little bit the story of the Schwartz clan, with so many of your family members being integral to the productions of the Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island on stage, screen, and even in musical form. So many of those things have been tackled by different members of the family. Would you say that you see a little bit of the Schwartz clan spirit in the Brady Bunch themselves?
Yeah. I'm not denying that in any way. I mean, there are episodes of the Brady Bunch that came right out of our lives, you know. Some of the dating ones sadly came out of my life at that time.
No.
I mean, I remember the episode where they said, something suddenly came up was the excuse. I mean, like,
yeah,
I heard that way too often. So,
So our date for Saturday night is still on, okay?
Sorry, Doug. I can't make it.
You can't.
Something suddenly came up.
no, but many of the stories, you know, we had a housekeeper. We were not a blended family. We had a housekeeper, and Dad went off to work, you know,
right.
when we were growing up, and Mom was a stay-at-home mom and all that. And so, you know, those kind of family dynamics are all over the place.
You know, like we've brought up a few times now, it's interesting, especially, you know, after reading the book. I went to film school. I tried to get into the film industry. That was more my focus. But reading so much about the TV industry, it's just incredible how many full scale. I mean, I guess the same is applied to screenwriting in Hollywood, but how many things that you've written that, like you just said, you know, offhand, oh yeah, I sold a mini series to CBS that never got made. I can't imagine the feeling of working on something to a degree from a writing perspective, and then kind of watching that just fizzle out, disappear, and be shipped away. And then I don't know how you wake up and just move on to the next thing. I mean, I guess it must be nice to have options, surely, but what would you say the things are that are most important to you that never got made?
There was an autobiographical thing I wrote called Carruthers and Blood. And back in the 60s, I was part of a comedy team. I was a black-white comedy team. And my partner was a Black Panther. And we got involved in politics, and there was some murders involved while we were doing comedy. And it's a pretty heroic time, you know, the 60s. And so there's always interest in that. And I'm hoping that'll get done.
That sounds pretty fascinating.
But what you said, though, and about tenacity, you know, every movie, and I've written, I don't want to, this is going to sound crazy to a lot of people.
No, go ahead.
I've written 145 movies, and you know, I've had 45 plays produced. So but every movie that I've written, and only about 5 have gotten made, they're all filmed in my head.
Right.
And so at the end, when it says, I don't know how to get to the end unless I write the whole movie.
Right.
And so it's done. And believe me, it was perfect.
Yeah.
In fact, right now we just won, I wrote a movie called Love and Taxes, and it's just won the Myrtle Beach Film Festival, best comedy and actors and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
And just last week we just won the Houston Film Festival, best something or other.
Congrats.
And it was it's a unique thing because it was a feature film shot in 3 days. In 3 days.
Ay.
Right. And it was my concept, which is it's like same time next year. So it's a woman's relationship with her tax guy, who she sees once every so many years. And so each of these scenes is shot in one shot with a Steadicam.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I'm busy that way and just going forward and just doing stuff. There's also always Brady stuff, by the way.
Yeah.
There's new Brady stuff, and we're talking about, you know, always doing about a Gilligan feature, and the Brady musical plays around the country. No, Brady musicals have a national tour coming up, and the Gilligan musical plays around the country.
Well, I am definitely going to keep an eye out for all of the work that you were just describing. And as always, as soon as they announce a Gilligan's Island movie, I will be the first in the theater.
Now, let me say this much. We've been trying to sell that. It's been in development since 1988. Okay? Hey. My book on the making of the Gilligan movie is on page 700. There is no movie in sight.
Oh, my God.
The book is called Invitation to a Shipwreck.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I hope we can finish that book soon.
I don't know. I'm just having fun writing it. So
that's so good. It brings me a lot of joy to see that you're still able to kind of do your thing creatively and make great art. And that's really inspiring to me. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about all this stuff. This was a real pleasure for me. So thank you so much.
Well, you know what? I've had a great time talking to you, kind of meeting you here. This is cool.
I want to end with just a very quick light question, something that's
Okay.
out on your IMDb. I tried to research it and find a copy or figure out which episodes you had written. I did not, but can you please tell our audience at home about your involvement in Baywatch?
Well, talking about our family.
Yeah.
Baywatch was created by my cousin, Doug, Albert's son.
Oh, wow.
And he wanted to do he wanted to do a Gilligan based episode. And so we said, yeah, we'll do a Gilligan based episode, but I have to write it. And so then I wrote that for Baywatch, and then they really liked that. And so then I did another one.
Did they film that?
Pardon me?
Did they end up filming that episode?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it like,
I don't remember the title of it. It's a dream sequence thing.
Oh, it's a dream.
And Bob Denver's in it. Dawn Wells is in it, you know? Yeah.
Incredible. I'm reading all these prestigious plays and all these things, and I saw Baywatch. I was like, interesting. It's interesting. I didn't know I was connected.
Yeah, I'm people get pigeonholed, and I kind of have fought against that. So I just do stuff, and I just did a play last year called Classic Couples Counseling about a therapist for Shakespearean characters. So Hamlet, Ophelia come in. All these people.
Hamlet's daddy issues.
Yeah, all those issues were all over the place. That's pretty funny.
You could go on forever doing that, huh?
Yeah.
All right, Lloyd, thank you so much. I really appreciated this. Maybe we can do this again when the next adaptation comes flying across the world for you.
All right. And best of luck with your podcast.
Thank you so much. So yeah, thanks again to my cousin Lloyd for joining me in that discussion. Make sure to pick up a copy of Brady, Brady, Brady for the full scoop, and that includes a comprehensive history of the drama and madness that went on behind the scenes in the show, as written by men who created it together as father and son. The Schwartzes would go on to being shut out of the room entirely when it came to the Very Brady sequel. Although, as mentioned in the video, the TV movie where Mike Brady becomes president is not only a hoot, but it was made fully in control of Lloyd and the Schwartz family. And now moving on to Lord Xenu. So I guess I was kind of wrong about 1996's Mission Impossible. I mean, I still maintain that this film is my favorite of the entire series. Not focusing on endless action stunts, but instead leaning into the spycraft and espionage of the original series harder than in any other entry in the series to come after. And that's statistically and objectively proven. I mean, this is the only film in the entire franchise where Ethan Hunt does not shoot a single bullet from a gun. And when you need to kickstart a new series that mirrors the James Bond films, but for the American internet age, it's pretty bold to come out with a first entry that so heavily relies on dense plotting and morose backstabbing instead of outright action. The irony here is that despite the fact that 1996's Mission Impossible is the closest to the original series of almost any of the films to follow, it's also a film made by people who did not give a crap about the original series in a multitude of ways. Ever since its release in 1996, I kind of always looked at the first Mission movie as a Brian De Palma thriller first, and a Tom Cruise action vehicle second.
So that was a fucking lie.
This was a situation where whatever Tom wanted to do, they would make. They didn't care. They just wanted to make Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible.
I kind of figured all the directors to come after De Palma just interpreted the wrong parts of this movie as the best parts. I always assumed that Mission 1 was a film that existed before the notion that Tom Cruise's vanity and an undying allegiance to volcano aliens had taken over his career and mind.
Because a Scientologist does. He or she has the ability to create new and better realities and improve conditions.
I mean, especially when you look at the direct sequel to this movie, it's clear that the Mission series had jumped from an ensemble spycraft thriller to a one-man action-adventure circus. I mean, the shampoo commercial that is Mission Impossible 2 is a movie so utterly obsessed with itself and its star that it's honestly borderline parody. This is the worst Mission movie. This movie really, really sucks. So yeah, I always looked at the first Mission Impossible as some bastion of originality in the series. A nod to the show that inspired it, and a movie that was clearly Brian De Palma's vision first, and Tom Cruise's Bonfire of the Vanities second.
Here's the problem. You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do.
And boy, researching this, I guess I was pretty wrong about most of those assumptions. Because if anything is true, it's that Mission Impossible 1 was the utter blueprint for what would become Cruise's next 2 decades of movie making. First, let's debunk my first incorrect assumption from all those years of being a fan of this movie, and that's the idea that this was a faithful homage to the original series. It turns out that neither De Palma or Cruise really gave a shit about any of that, seemingly going out of their way to cut off the crew from the TV series at every turn. Like I mentioned in my Brady interview with Lloyd Schwartz, the studio sent director Reza Badi'i, who had directed more episodes of the series than any other person, to act as a sort of creative advisor on the production. Within days, De Palma approached him and informed him that while he was a fan of Reza's work, the movie would just be absolutely nothing like the show, and that Badi'i's participation in the project would only make both parties uncomfortable. And then bam, that was the end of that, and Badi'i was told to leave the mission set for good.
The American film director Brian De Palma, who I'm just about to meet for the first time, seems to rub people up the wrong way.
Then there's this completely insane true story that was recounted by famed actor Martin Landau, who was one of the stars of the original series from the 60s. Apparently, the fantastic opening sequence of the film where Ethan Hunt's IMF team is ultimately betrayed and killed off in horrifying fashion was meant to be portrayed by not the actors like Emilio Estevez and Jon Voight who ended up in the final film, but instead the writers had pitched that all of Ethan's murdered IMF team would be played by the original cast of the series. And while this is just like kind of a badass, awesome idea for a TV to film adaptation, man, that shit is pretty disrespectful.
Okay. You're stepping over line. You know you are. I'm just telling you right now. Put your manners back in.
They wanted to outright slaughter the entire cast of the TV show in the opening 15 minutes of this movie, and as a result, the entire cast of the original show collectively refused to reprise their roles in protest of their own character assassinations. Then there's my disillusionment about this being a lowly Tom Cruise starter project. Turns out this was the first movie that Cruise ever produced with Cruise and Wagner Productions, and he waived his usual $20 million fee for the film at the time in favor of a % on the movie's massive back end. I kind of thought that Mission Impossible was a series that didn't start with this Cruise is our overlord mindset right off the bat. But no, Cruise mostly did all of his own stunts here, pretty much ran the show, and apparently Brian De Palma had designed many of the film's action set pieces before a script even existed, which is very similar to how director Christopher McQuarrie is designing these movies with Cruise now. Furthermore, Cruise ended up performing most of his own stunt work right off the bat here, nearly drowning himself in this sequence, which is awesome. I mean, very cool. But yeah, he's pretty much acting a fool, like, from this first movie on. So yeah, maybe Mission Impossible wasn't the wholly original De Palma thriller that I've always classified it as. Clearly, this film was the blueprint for the action juggernaut series to come, with each entry leaning further and further into the invincible adventures of Ethan Hunt. But forgetting all that, taking ourselves back to the blessed year of 1996, I can easily explain the hypnotic hold that this film had over me as a kid. To really understand what was so special about the first Mission Impossible, you have to put yourself in the time period of when it came out. Yeah, I know, that's the whole point of much of this video, sorry for repetition, but back in 1996, the only other main male action franchise at the time, James Bond, had just been rebooted by my personal favorite Bond film ever, GoldenEye.
You were expecting someone else?
Other than that, the male-led action series of the 80s had all but trickled into non-existence, with Rambo, Rocky, John McClane, Schwarzenegger, and the rest of the Planet Hollywood crew becoming less and less relevant by the day. Gone were the swollen gun shows of the 1980s, replaced by techno thrillers with leading men whose intense, chiseled stares and pretty boy haircuts took over the cinemas. But unlike James Bond, a movie series that I always felt was far too campy and lacked any actual stakes, Mission Impossible came out swinging with this pitch-dark spycraft yarn that couldn't simply be resolved with the magazine of a Walther PP7. Ethan Hunt is this super intense, mysterious, conflicted, and paranoid character who has been worn down from a life of espionage, standing on the edge of his own sanity. Mission Impossible 2, the immediate sequel to this film, portrayed Hunt as this absolutely invincible unit of martial arts and death-defying stunts. But back in MI1, Hunt is like a Silicon Valley-era spy who can't trust anyone on his team or even his shady superiors. Hunt is a weary, glassy-eyed warrior who deals in intense whispers and deeply probing stares. People throw around the adjective paranoid when it comes to any thriller from the 90s that has a laptop and a cordless phone in it. But Mission Impossible really makes you feel the definition of paranoia. Like the scene where Ethan's glass trap is being triggered is like actually nerve-shredding. The confounding and mounting plot to amplify Ethan's most paranoid qualities by the shadowy villain that is tracking him throws Cruise's character into a web of lies and deceit that leaves him full of rage, crippled by bureaucratic inefficiency and ready to tear the world down around him. Mission 1 is filled with elements of noir, cyber war, and deep-seated double crosses, as Ethan watches his whole entire team die in front of his eyes. And that's just the beginning of his betrayals. Unlike James Bond, this movie wasn't about getting the girl. It wasn't some lunatic with plans to destabilize the world's government by building an ice palace and an invisible car. This was a deeply mature story that was as complicated as it was intriguing. And I say this with 100% confidence. I left the theater in '96 being flat out confused about the plot of this movie, and truthfully, that was a first for me. It was the first real spycraft film that I had ever seen, and the evolving twists and turns during the IMF's mission to recover the stolen knock list at the heart of the film was downright baffling to me. I mean, as a child, I was like picking my boogers and eating water ice all day. I didn't know what a knock list was. I know what a friggin' hard drive is. Heat-activated floors. What is this?
If you knew what you were getting into, you never would have done it.
But this isn't a complaint, guys. This is a huge strength of the first Mission Impossible film that sets it apart from much of its own franchise. As great as Philip Seymour Hoffman was in Mission 3, as great as Henry Cavill was in Fallout, the first Mission Impossible isn't about some mustache-twirling villain, pun intended. I mean, you barely even know who is antagonizing Ethan until the final act of the film. The hallmark of a great mystery or spy thriller is this exact kind of plotting. And while the rest of the franchise has leaned far harder into a more Bond-like, Bourne-like formula, this first film is full of big ideas and a deeply mature execution that is rare as hell for big action tentpole films. You can see this stark difference in tone even in the video game adaptation of the film, with Mission Impossible for N64 releasing about a year after GoldenEye, arguably the greatest movie game adaptation in history. Now, I'm not here to say that Mission Impossible is a better game, but it is a far more mature and complex game than GoldenEye, reflecting the films respectively. Mission Impossible for N64 is like this super involved, nerve-shattering, and deeply immersive game where decoding the complexity of your objectives is every bit as exciting as watching them play out. This was a challenging, dark, and thrilling game, and while there's nothing more fun than giving Putin the old what for in a tank rolling down the streets of a Russian neighborhood, there is simply nothing as satisfying from that game as the sensation you get from fully completing one of the nearly impossible and deeply intricate missions that Mission Impossible sets up for the player. I mean, there are set pieces from this game like the formal party and the train station where you actually feel like a secret agent in the midst of some tangled web of spycraft, instead of some invincible bullet factory with a geometry head-ass having girlfriend. I'll always remember this film fondly. I'll always die on the hill that this is the most mature and unique of the entire Mission series. And I'll always rank Tom Cruise's performance in this one up with his most intense and involved dramatic roles from his career. This movie spawned the Tom Cruise run. It catapulted his career as a mainstream action hero and short king, and ultimately succeeded in telegraphing John Voight as the villain he would later become in life.
That one can't get away with it. There will be a price to pay. The battle of righteousness versus Satan. Yes, Satan.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, the funny thing is they hired Voight as the main antagonist of this film because they thought that the audience would never think that he was the villain all along. And I don't blame them. Anaconda had not come out yet, and neither had this. So yeah, big fan of Mission Impossible 1. It's shot on film. It's got De Palma's signature style all over it. It's bursting with amazing practical work like the iconic Mission Impossible face masks. which only in this first film are achieved with absolutely zero CGI. This is classic action suspense filmmaking and a clear escalation in severity and action from the more cagey 60s TV series. Who knew that in 2024 we'd still be seeing entries in the Mission Impossible franchise? But for one of its best stories, it's time to start at the beginning. You know, the sad part of dedicating the intro for this video to Star Trek Generations is that I had to end up choosing only one of the Star Trek films from the 90s, when there are still, like, some pretty good ones to go. But, you know, this video script is 4.5 times longer than my longest script ever, so I think it'd just be best to move on. Oh well, shucks, god darn it.
No! Just kidding, bitches. This is my world, and I do what I gotta do to eat, motherfuckers.
Time to talk about the best of the Star Trek films from the 90s.
Star Trek First Contact.
I'll keep it kind of brief here since I'm not trying to be like Mike from Red Letter Media, who has to relate everything to Star Trek in every video he makes because it's the only thing he can speak with even an ounce of confidence on besides early onset incontinence. But yeah, Star Trek First Contact might be a sequel to another film on this list, but it fulfills the dreams, expectations, and best attributes of any TV to film masterpiece. It's also a really good example of escalation by way of sequelization, with this darker, more personal, and more action-packed entry resembling the second-in-a-film franchise classics like The Dark Knight or The Empire Strikes Back. And yeah, okay, I ripped on Mike from Red Letter Media, a guy who's probably more successful than I'll ever be at anything in my life, to open this section because his Plinkett video review series absolutely shat on this movie, and on the Star Trek Next Gen movies in general, which is something I can absolutely understand for these two, but something I flat out rebuke when it comes to these two, but especially this one. Generations, I can fight for that a little bit. First Contact, this is a banger, baby. I'm more in the camp of people who can enjoy the best of intellectual Star Trek like DS9, while also understanding the necessity, fun, and importance of more action-oriented / horror elements in the series like Species 8472 from Voyager, or the Borg from Next Gen. Mike likes to harp on the fact that First Contact is some kind of mindless action movie.
It's because it's a dumbed-down, dumb action movie, and it lacks a really good, complicated story, like a lot of the TNG episodes had.
But that is a super reductive take that doesn't take into consideration the Borg as a character in the franchise to begin with. It was never about, you know, sitting around making chess moves with the Borg. This is like the xenomorphs of the friggin' Star Trek universe. Just a hive of unending pain and evil. I mean, any episode of The Borg was a chance for the Next Gen series to shift into this ominous, horror-adjacent vibe that always riveted me as a kid. Star Trek was never fully for the D&D neckbeards. There were always little action-y set pieces and more kid-friendly episodes woven into the tapestry. Believe it or not, there is room for the Star Trek series to mimic the tones and vibes of other genres. Just like it's totally fine for Trek to become a comedy, or a noir, or a philosophical period piece.
I am not a merry man!
Not this shit.
My friend was taken by ICE officers.
Give me something for the pain, and let me die.
But it's also fine for there to be shades of horror and action in there too.
You fight like a woman.
To a degree, I mean, more than anyone, Mike from Red Letter Media should see how terrible this new generation of Trek is.
A little squeamish, are we? I can take my trade elsewhere.
Anyway, I'm not much of an actor.
With action and emotion taking over every level of intellect and writing logic imaginable. And I don't know, I like to picture him, like, after having watched Picard Season 1 for his channel, seeing another $48 in revenue coming from his video about how terrible First Contact is. Like, remember when complaining about the prequels was the new hot rage? Well, congratulations. Look what you have wrought.
You see, in my opinion, where the prequels utterly failed, Star Trek excelled. In fact, J.J. Abrams should have directed the prequels, and George Lucas should have directed people to their seats in the theater.
Oh no! And besides, just because they put Picard in a wife beater and had him yell a little bit doesn't automatically qualify this whole movie as action dreck. It figures that toxic nerds would try to tear down a bald king as he showed off his chiseled abs. Everybody got to be sexy at one point or another in the show. I mean, Data got f***ing laid. And you're trying to gatekeep a wife beater? This man has a fake dick. The Borg were always the most popular villain from The Next Generation, and this film not only portrayed them perfectly, but upped the fear, paranoia, and terror they caused by showing us new parts of their lore, new elements to their twisted and sick biology, and a larger scope of what their unending drone force looked like, when the show's portrayal of the Borg was kinda limited by its TV budget. Once again, this is a bigger, badder, and more insidious Borg, led by, once again to mimic the king of sequelization, aliens, the Borg Queen, a new addition to the lore and an incredibly formidable threat against our crew and the galaxy at large. So not only is Plinkett way off about the action read on this film, but you'd think that Mike would be overjoyed to see the most critical pieces of lore in Star Trek history finally brought to life by the portrayal of the titular event itself. First Contact. Okay, there's probably some bad time paradox writing in here. When is there not in a story like this? Endgame, if you look at Endgame under the slightest scientific scrutiny, it crumbles like a house made of leaves. It will boggle your mind how stupid this movie is.
If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future. Star Trek, Terminator, the past, which can't now be changed by your new future. Quantum Leap, Wrinkle in Time, Somewhere in Time, becomes the past. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which can't now be changed by your new future.
Tub Time Machine.
Hot Tub Time Machine. The past. That past becomes your future. Star Trek, Terminator. Who told you that? Becomes the past.
Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit.
And okay, maybe this is Picard breaking not only the Prime Directive, but the Temporal Directive. But that's just a way of showing the audience, in my opinion, when it comes to the Borg, that the fight for Picard is personal. It makes him irrational. People clown on this speech, but this is actually sad to watch. And Patrick Stewart does an incredible job of portraying his final transformation into the fabled Captain Ahab.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your little quest. Captain Ahab has to go hunt his whale. No!
Oh yeah, did I mention that this movie is not only a time travel horror movie, but a Moby Dick parable? And while Red Letter Media can trash Picard's weird action guy, screamo character turn in this movie,
We'll make them pay for what they've done.
is that not the exact kind of behavior that would classify Picard dramatically as this metaphor for a man who has chased his white whale until the point of insanity? First Contact was a clear elevation of the stakes and mythos of the TV show, finally showing us the event in human history when we reached out to the stars and somebody reached back. And it's all delicately wrapped up in this insane time travel story, which is playing out with humor and grace and wonder at the same time as this creepy, alien-esque Borg takeover is happening.
In the future, this whole area, you're standing almost on the exact spot where your statue's gonna be. Statue? Oh, yeah.
There's something so fundamentally creative, riveting, and genius about First Contact. It's funny, it's sweet, it's action-packed, horrifying, and epic in scope. To say this movie is trash while scrutinizing over every other detail of every single episode of The Next Generation is just a bad take from a group of dudes that trashed Rogue One. Never gonna live that down. Anyway, great Star Trek film. This is the Wrath of Khan for the Next Gen era, and anyone who doesn't think so should be strapped to a chair and shown Picard Seasons 1 and 2 and Disco out of order, with all the episodes mixed on a constant loop with Star Trek Into Darkness occasionally spliced in for good measure. First Contact slaps. It kicked off so many awesome ideas about the Borg that came to fruition in amazing shows like Voyager in the years following the film. It's just a badass piece of Trek in a world where most Trek isn't considered badass, or when it's trying to be badass is cringe. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't room for this. So yeah, no more hating on First Contact. No more reducing the next-gen movies to just dim-witted versions of the show, when we've now seen what real dim-witted Star Trek looks like. One year before the release of The Phantom Menace, I found myself as an 11-year-old sci-fi fanatic absolutely chomping at the bit for every piece of spacefaring, alien-adjacent, Event Horizon-ish, Star Wars-esque CGI action, horror, sci-fi schlock that Hollywood could possibly churn out. I mean, I was watching Carnosaur and The Guyver. I would watch anything. As a kid who would rent any tape from Blockbuster that even had a spaceship on it, and clearly as a kid who already loved TV to film adaptations, a motion picture production of the 1960s Lost in Space TV show was absolutely chum to my shark brain. Let alone the fact that it was seemingly pitched to my generation's ADHD, Pepsi Cool, Blue Zero, extreme italics rollerblading sensibilities. With this young hip cast, cool new tech, kicking new font, and zooted up robot who looks like a PT Cruiser. And sure, people hated this movie. It got bad reviews.
I never saw the TV series, so if this movie contained any campy references to it or in-jokes, I didn't get them. As for the rest of the film, it bored me. But negative review for me, I simply can't recommend it.
My review is not even mixed. It's way, way down with my thumbs.
It destroyed Matt LeBlanc's and partially Heather Graham's movie career, and sure, it was considered a fiscal failure, and all of the actors were released from their potential trilogy contracts soon after the movie sunk. But I am here, ever the contrarian, to tell you that f*** you. I love this goddamn movie, and it's terrible. Hear that, Insecure Monsterverse fans? You can like something while recognizing it is terrible. Anyway, 1998's Lost in Space dropped at the zenith of large-scale event movie making in the 90s, a time when every blockbuster movie came bundled with an assault of toys and CD-ROMs and soundtracks, loaded with the most kickin', badass versions imaginable of your mammy and pappy's stale as a Chipotle bag ordered after 6 p.m. TV shows from their childhood. I had a crush on almost everybody in this movie, from Lacey Chabert to Mimi Rogers to Heather Graham, and I don't feel bad about a single one of those answers. I mean, okay, Lacey was 14, but I was 11, no drizzy, and sure, Mimi and Heather were playing mother and daughter, but when they filmed this movie, they were only 14 years apart in age. So yeah, I would have nailed the entire Robinson clan, which I know doesn't qualify as a review, but f*** it, throw in LeBlanc and Oldman and William Hurt too. I mean, these gentlemen were positively dashing in their respective space romp gear. Okay, but beneath the horny bonk and beneath the 90s gimmicks and flashy TV to movie adaptation strategies that sold this film to the common 90s man.
A new Robinson family, they're a little edgy, a little temperamental, witty. But you see them struggling with issues that a lot of families struggle with.
Lost in Space is actually this really dark, pessimistic, frightening, and morally complex time travel story, with some positively tragic plot moments, some real stakes at hand, and a third act time paradox plot where Gary Oldman turns into a giant frickin' spider. This movie kind of rules. I mean, the CGI has aged worse than Linda Hamilton, but if you can get into the spirit, science, and madness of Lost in Space, then you'll be vibing with one of the weirdest and best sci-fi movies of the 90s. This movie had so many classic 90s hallmarks and innovations, and before you try bashing this movie's special effects as some sort of fatal flaw, well, let me introduce you to the first bullet time sequence ever. Oh, what's that? The Matrix didn't invent bullet time? It did not. That seems to be a myth of epic proportions when it comes to 90s special effects history lore. Because bullet time appeared in this film first. That's right, 1998's Forgotten Lost in Space. So there, haters, frig off Keanu. Once again, the producers and directors of this film took the TV show that it was based on and blew up the stakes, effects, characters, and plot from a rather stagnant one-camera sitcom to this galaxy-spanning time travel adventure with reality-bending consequences. Sure, there were mistakes, like the fact that originally this CGI abomination Blarp was a practical puppet before being converted into this living friggin' banana monster. He looks like if Donkey Kong sneezed. Sure, they cast the absolutely fantastic Jared Harris, one of the greatest actors alive, as a time travel tortured Will Robinson. But then they replaced his entire vocal performance with ADR because they didn't like his American accent.
Today, I will change history. One trip through time.
We lie and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there, but it is still there.
So yeah, you could spend all your time identifying problems like this within this film, as most critics and audiences did. Or you can suspend your bullshit for an hour and a half of your life and enjoy this family-friendly gem from a much wackier time. This movie could have been an overly campy rated G romp like the painfully average Show revival on Netflix. But I commend the filmmakers here for reimagining the world of Lost in Space through a far grittier, more extreme lens. There are a handful of genuinely spooky set pieces in this movie. I mean, this movie didn't have to go so hard, and it has like a 15-minute Event Horizon derelict ship horror movie in the center of it. Plus, there are some great symbolic design choices here that really exemplify what I love about TV to film adaptations. With the Jupiter 1 shell around the ship looking like the original 60s design, which then gives way to this slick vibrator that comes shooting out of it. And I love how Robot is kind of the inverse here, starting as this new Pepsi Blue ice design, which eventually gives way to the original design of the robot as the crew gets lost in time and lost in space. This is a movie like AI that leaves you time and again with this bizarre melancholy, and it's a film that leaves me with bittersweet feelings as I rewatch it, because it's risky and odd in all the ways that movies and TV shows aren't really allowed to be anymore. For these reasons, I will always feel at home with the Robinson family. I'll always see myself as the kid who saw this movie around the same age as its young protagonist. I mean, I hated school too. Look at this shit. It's hilarious.
There's no laughing matter, Professor Robinson is terribly gifted.
The changing shape of education.
These little tiny products of a truly brilliant mind.
No more monkey business. I mean it.
And yeah, I will always have a soft spot in my heart for 1998's Lost in Space. Dog it! It is good to finally be in 1998, which was a crazy-ass year for TV to film adaptation classics. We had movies like the Rugrats movie, which exploded the gack-covered world of Nickelodeon Kids TV onto the big screen at long last. But most people, I think, gravitate towards the Rugrats in Paris movie, but that didn't hit until the year 2000, so it didn't make this list. The same year that we also had The Mask of Zorro, which adapted the famous black and white TV show into this romantic, action-packed, iconic action movie from the director of the equally fantastic GoldenEye. But for me, the only one that I saw in theaters was the TV to movie crown jewel of 1998, the mother-friggin' X-Files movie. Hot take alert, this movie is not only one of the best TV to film adaptations ever, especially if you're using the metrics that we've already established in this video, but it's also one of the best science fiction movies of the 90s. Like all the best TV to film adaptations, X-Files Fight the Future is successful in not only rewarding fans of the series, but also in creating a film that is entertaining and unique on its own merits. The X-Files movie has all the clear escalations that we've seen thus far in this video, from better special effects to a bigger budget to the kind of increased stakes that would leave any fan of the show absolutely breathless. I remember really thinking that Mulder, but especially Scully, may not make it through this movie alive, and that was something that had me absolutely gripped with anxiety as an 11-year-old in the theater. All of the show's best themes of governmental paranoia, mass-produced hysteria, extraterrestrial quandaries, and the ploys of a shadowy syndicate are all multiplied and even personified in this film, with finally some true glimpses of the alien menace teased throughout the series. This is a stylish, sharply directed, and at times truly scary movie, with both cold opens of this film giving me nightmares for years to come. This first opening scene is one of the strongest examples of TV to movie escalation, in budget and scope. Whereas every scene of the X-Files TV show opens up with this typewriter font letting us know that we're like in Quantico or Washington or Philadelphia or whatnot, the X-Files movie opens up with this positively epic logline. I mean, look at this. this let me know right off the bat that it was going to be a far more large-scale and ambitious piece of X-Files lore than anything we typically saw in the show. Then, also unlike the X-Files, the movie transitions to a second cold open, which is somehow even more terrifying than the first. I mean, this is some iconic 90s movie setup schlock. You looked into this boy's eyes and you were like, things are about to get screwed. And if we're being honest, this cold open segues into a third cold open with this amazing bomb defusal scene which echoed the Oklahoma bombing at the time in eerie and terrifying ways. Some excellent miniature work on display in this movie, like all over the place, but especially in this explosion scene. I mean, damn, this rules. Look at the way this car rocks. Blow! The X-Files movie was also gifted with a gloriously edgy late 90s soundtrack featuring original songs by the Foo Fighters.
I'm hosting Saturday Night Live this week with musical guest Foo Fighters. I don't know why, but I assumed that you were Chinese.
Bjork, The Cure, Ween, and the Dust Brothers. Which felt like an event compared to the minimalistic, original, unlicensed music of the show. Not to knock the original series music by Mark Snow, it is utterly genius and peak moody perfection. The original composer for the show, Mark Snow, is thankfully brought in to handle the film, with a full orchestra at his disposal instead of the somewhat stuffy digital instruments of the TV series.
To be up in front of that 85-piece orchestra conducting them, and it just blew me away.
Some of what I call the cliche X-File electronic sounds mixed in with this big orchestra, it gives it this great sense of scope and grandeur and bigness that everyone is trying to achieve.
And yeah, back to this insane 90s lineup for the soundtrack here. You may be wondering how semi-jam band alternative rock group Ween ended up on here. I mean, I was. Apparently both David Duchovny and his then-wife Téa Leoni got together through their mutual love of the band, leading to their inclusion on the album. Hilariously enough, while this crop of songs was inspired by the X-Files in general, only one song from the entire album actually showed up in the film itself. Regardless of your interest in the show, if you love movies about ancient aliens, government conspiracies, mysterious pandemics,
I'm the key figure in an ongoing government charade. Plot to conceal the truth about the existence of extraterrestrials.
It's a global conspiracy, actually, with key players, the highest levels of power, and that reaches down into the lives of every man, woman, and child on this planet. First, no one believes me. I'm an annoyance to my superiors, a joke to my peers. They call me Spooky. Spooky Mulder, whose sister was abducted by aliens when he was just a kid, and now chases after little green men with a badge and a gun, shouting to the heavens or anyone who'll listen that the fix is in it, the sky is falling. And when it hits, it's gonna be the shitstorm of all time.
shady cabals of evildoers, and of course, aliens, then you're gonna love this movie. It's a thinking man's sci-fi film in a generation of mostly brainless blockbuster alien action, exemplified by this hilarious moment in the movie where Mulder literally pisses on a poster of Independence Day, something that ID4 director Roland Emmerich would eventually proclaim was, quote, over the line. Yeah, the dumpus who put Siskel and Ebert as literal buffoon characters in one of his movies, like they were Bulk and Skull, thought that Mulder peeing on a poster was overboard. 2012, directed by Emmerich, that is overboard, not this.
Your mayor, Mayor Evarts!
At the end of the day, I'd easily declare Fight the Future as a sci-fi classic that stands strongly on its own as a piece of fantastic, paranoid blockbuster filmmaking. It's a shame that after the release of this movie, the show went into a tailspin that would eventually drive the IP into the ground, with the next X-Files film in 2008 having nothing to do with this one, and starring Exhibit.
On the line, gentlemen, look left, look right.
You know, if I do some work, I want to get paid. You know what I'm saying?
And being quite middling and average. And oh my god, don't even get me started on the series revival, which makes Fight the Future here look like 2001: A Space Odyssey. When the X-Files movie came out, the X-Files were the biggest thing in the entire world, and Fight the Future is proof positive that for a moment in time, the adventures of Mulder and Scully were both peak television and peak movie making as well. Cheers to an awesome movie that finally stopped teasing that the truth was out there, and finally showed us what we had been chasing for years on end from the comfort of our living room. At first, it felt kind of anticlimactic to cover South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut as the final film in this video. Of all the films on this list, South Park's movie most aesthetically resembles the show that it's based on. It's a movie that feels kind of trapped in time as the show has continued on for another 20 years after it, coming up with many more musical episodes and a bevy of multi-episode story arcs, every bit as great as the 1999 movie. I mean, Imagination Land is every bit as incredible as Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, so why does it feel integral to highlight the South Park movie after so many epic TV film adaptations?
Don't say it, Cartman! Well, don't do it, Cartman! Well, I'm warning you! I'm getting pretty sick of him calling my mom. Well, cause mom's a bitch, she's a big fat witch, she's a bitch.
Because, let me cook. In a way, this is the end of the journey. This movie is made by the same company, the same people, the same voice actors and composer, and animation studio as the show. There isn't some cosmic leap being done here. It's simply a case of TV finally catching up to movie level quality, and the lines beginning to blur. That's where all the cowboys gone, if you're wondering, because the gap between TV and film eventually closed, with genius creators like Trey Parker and Matt Stone being just as capable of producing a film as they were at producing an incredible show. I mean, they literally worked on these projects at the exact same time. Now the world began to understand the importance of both formats. Instead of needing movies to elevate TV shows, now TV was heading into the realm of movies, switching to widescreen, airing on networks like HBO that were beginning to dream up their most ambitious projects yet, with The Sopranos coming out the same year as this film. Shows like The Sopranos didn't need a movie. This does not count. They didn't need to be elevated or made more grand by the silver screen. It was 1999, and the golden age of TV was truly beginning. And while Trey Parker and Matt Stone fought Paramount Pictures over every single creative decision, every trailer, every cut of this movie, every title for this movie, which apparently Paramount was too stupid to know that this was a penis reference, they made them change it to this. Soon there would be no one to have to answer to when it came to making TV adaptations. Soon there would be no one like Lloyd Schwartz fighting for his vision, for what the show was supposed to be before it could be ruined by movie studio bigwigs. Soon, TV would be TV, movies would be movies, and rarely the twain shall meet. South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was the last gem of a generation of hilarious, moving, heartfelt, imaginative, and kind of bizarre TV to film adaptations. But at least they didn't go out with a whimper. I mean, to be a kid my age in 1999. A ripe 12 years young, hearing the song Uncle F***er for the first time. When the 14 incredible Broadway-level songs from the South Park movie finally made their way into the hallways and bus stops of our childhood, a new generation of lewd behavior and rebellious overhaul began. Us elder millennials would be the ones to burn down Woodstock, the ones to smash metal and rap together, the ones to frost our tips golden and wear our Jinko chains long. The South Park movie elevated the popularity, scope, reach, and vulgarity of the show, acting like a comedic nuclear warhead to the unsuspecting children of planet Earth. We all knew the songs. We all knew the jokes, even if we didn't understand them. And for one more time in the 90s, a piece of cinematic gold rose from our television screens and dominated our multiplexes. We had to sneak in with our older brothers or cool aunts or uncles, or we would figure out how to get this bad boy on VHS or the soundtrack on CD, and you'd just go absolutely ham. For a final time, the world of TV had stretched what we thought was possible, projecting the cardboard cutouts of a show that hadn't quite earned its flowers onto the unsuspecting masses. Like all great adaptations from the 90s, for one last time, our imagination had become bigger than reality.
Imagination.
And with that, I would like to thank you, my friends, for joining me on this journey. We may be in a world of streaming now, of movie-level films being released onto our TVs daily, and movie-level TV shows premiering on our apps nightly. But for a brief moment, the TV adaptations of the 90s were king, and it was good to be the king. And yeah, I didn't include any SNL adaptation movies. What's that, like Wayne's World, It's Pat, The Coneheads, Night at the Roxbury? I mean, man, it's almost as if I left them out for a reason. What? As for now, I am leaving the roaming cruise ship of my nostalgia behind. This was DS Lyons, host of the Movie Blues, signing out.
Because I love you, and I love you, and I love you, and I've seen all your movies, and I love your movies, and I think you're the best.